Welcome back to Inklings Behind the Scenes. This is J.S. Bray with Mr. Bray Labs. And today's episode, it's another driving one, but really the reason why I do a lot of these driving ones is that sometimes it's difficult to sit down in front of the computer, plan out a conversation, and really dive deep into a particular topic without the necessary but interruptions that I have with family, meetings, and work. And so, but I still want to continue to give and deliver quality content. Sometimes the quality is going to be subjective, but the content itself, as far as what it contains, is always going to be rich, I believe. So this episode, I am going to talk about some of the most uncomfortable, realistic things that I can possibly squeeze out. And that's going to be talking about money, animation, and money. Why this is important, what can you expect, and I'll tell you straight up, some of these numbers might discourage you, or they might actually just change your world altogether. So let's start with animation as a vocation. So animation is broken down into different sort of stages. So each different category of stages of what your job is often has to do how compensation is delivered. So if you are a director, if you are a writer, if you are an animator, or if you are, say, you do sound design, each different stage, typically they have a budget based upon the stage of production. And so I'm going to give you a small, silly little number. Like, let's say I had $100 and I had to split this $100 three ways. And depending on the three ways I have to split it, I have to determine which one is the most important to get paid immediately, which one sort of has to be done before other parts can be done. So in animation, sometimes the way budgets are broken down with animation, it's broken down but really oftentimes they don't really tell you this. You don't know that the director is going to make millions of dollars where the other people will make significantly less. And not too long ago, but it's happened multiple times, different studios have gone completely belly up. Okay, there's a studio recently in I believe Scotland. There's been multiple studios that have done just incredible work. The folks that did the Life of Pi film, which is probably, in my opinion, still some of the most beautiful CG I have ever seen. Just incredible, gorgeous content that the studio that did that went belly up. And a lot of the people, the talent that worked on it, didn't get paid. Now, I'm not just here to complain about why that happens. I actually can express some of the reasons why that happens. Some of the reasons why people don't get paid is that the point of entry becomes so expensive that there's so much debt involved that some shows have to become a smash hit just to break even. Okay, so hear me out. Some shows have to become such a smash hit they have to break even. And this is why the certain genre is actually what you're doing makes a difference. So, while this is a kid-friendly channel, and I do that because it makes it easy enough for us to put our content on YouTube, but also because it's part of my value structure. I always want to be able to have conversations that are in the ears of my children. And if my conversation is far too, I'd say, crass to be for a younger audience, then I honestly don't feel like that I'm doing my own personal morals and the audience any favors. And so that's, even if the topic itself might be something that kids don't necessarily care about. But financial literacy is a topic that we should be talking to children at an early age. The more we talk about financial literacy, the hope and prayer is that they can start seeking that out. And this is important. Okay, it is important to understand about business. Many of these big animation studios, these blockbuster studios, household names, have gone belly up. And it's ultimately what is going to happen with some of the biggest ones out there. I say this in sort of a doom and gloom, but I'll be honest with you, there's probably very few giant studios that will last the next 30 years. And 30 years is probably being generous. I think closer to 20 years from now, most of those studios will be belly up. And the reason why is that they're not sustainable. They're not sustainable because the point of entry is so expensive, where people have to spend $250 million just to make a movie,
Well, that means that you have to get a lot of vested interest. And so when you're doing vested interest, when you're you're going out of your way to get that kind of money, these folks that invest in films, they don't want a 20% return, 5% return, 7% return. They're not like a credit union wanting to just have you a low interest rate on your car or on your home loan. These are these investors want massive returns. They want massive. They want to give you $1 and get 100 back. And now I'm not here to just criticize investors, but I'm telling you some of the way that this works. So if you go after these big budget films, what happens is that maybe the actual value of the film, of all the cost, is considerably less. But because of interest rates, because of the point of entry, like I said, is so high, um, that these studios are going belly under. Like they're completely belly up. Sorry, they're going completely under because they cannot keep up with this. It's similar to what happened really with a lot of musicians. This happened drastically for musicians for a really long time. Is that they'd have a hit song, they'd sign sort of well, they'd sign be almost indentured servant to a record label. And the record label would take 80 or 90% of all profits. And then that slice, that little itty bitty slice, is what those musicians had to do to survive. And they had to pay their taxes, they had to do everything else, and they had to pay for the travel. It got really, really ridiculous. So a band could sell 1 million records, but maybe only make $100,000, which is insane if you think about it. But it happens in a similar aspect because the way that animation business is done, and this is my goal, and I'm probably going to upset a lot of people by doing this, but my goal is to be completely transparent with you, to tell you that the animation world is far too expensive. It's far too expensive. It costs more than you're getting. Okay, and the reason why is that you can look at it between the animation world and the commercial world. Things don't need to cost millions and millions of dollars per episode. That's bonkers. Even with a certain degree of production crews, and I'll tell you, there are studios out there right now that can churn out full-length animated episodes in a week. They can. The folks who do the South Park. Well, I'm not particularly advocating for my audience to go and watch that show. There are people who enjoy it, as you don't see, but I definitely don't think it's children friendly. But I'm telling you that those folks in a documentary called 6 Days to Air, and that showed how quickly they can churn their ideas. It also shows how they can keep their comedy as fresh as possible. My point is that animation does not need to be this laborious and overpriced process. It can be valued correctly, but also it has to change. It has to change or these big studios will completely go belly up. And this is why they're leaning on AI to replace things, because they can't keep up with their debt. They owe so much money before they even begin penciling a new idea. And so, but that's sort of the problem. And I'm going to tell you more and more about how animation, the business of animation, it costs a certain way. So back to my analogy of the dollar. I said, imagine you have $100 and you have to divide it 3 ways. So what happens is that you end up having people that make decisions about film and about distribution and about rights and about who gets what. And all that gets in the middle of that is greed. And there's no transparency. So this is the hard part, is that while there is an animators union, so to speak, that does try to advocate for animators so they get paid well. But the problem is that even in these unions, they're not really structured the way they should be. And the way they should be is not as much about everyone getting a paid fair share, but it really should be everything being paid in a transparent manner. And the difference is ultimately is that everyone gets paid a percentage that's the same regardless of the amount of money they turn in or how amount of budget it is, but it's based upon the role and responsibility that you have in the production. Okay, so that is the most equitable way, is to not just give someone who has the biggest title the biggest paycheck, but to give person who has the biggest responsibility. No, it's that people who share these responsibilities get paid a percentage. They all get a point, so to speak. And so this is a longer conversation when I talk about this, but ultimately the reason why these big studios are going belly under is because they're in massive debt. They're massive, massive debt, and they end up having to create these bloated productions that they really won't be able to turn a profit on. I mean, the sad thing, the tragedy was Warner Brothers had to shelve some beautiful animation as a tax write-off, and they had to shelve it. They couldn't release it to the public. And now that breaks my heart because I've always been a huge fan of like Wile E. Coyote and those classic animations, and them repurposing them or redoing them. It warms my heart to think that there's more content out there. But because these studios, they basically are owned by banks, and so all right. So how does that work? So the way that animations are basically funded. There is, of course, angel investors, bootstrapping, people spend their own money, love projects. This is the beauty of artists and also the weakness of artists. Many artists will do things for free. Many artists will do things for the love of it. Many artists will do things because they care about, they dream about the project. But the overall return may be not necessarily tangible. And so this is where studios have done well because they've basically used a penal colony of well-natured, good-natured, enthusiastic talent. And this is me being a bit spicy about it, but largely animation has been kind of a penal colony, and a penal colony means a prison workforce. They've prisoned people by their dream and desire to want to make something. Well, I want to break those chains for you right now. You don't need to have a massive, 7 figures budget to create an animation. Now, to compete and to make royalties and to make all these sort of revenue off this, this actually is this is a great conversation because if you understand the business of animation and you understand that there are gatekeepers along the way, the greatest of the gatekeepers are actually not. It's not the big studios. Okay, the big studios are not the ones that artists need to fight to be a part of. It's actually understanding the distribution, understanding how you get paid. And I don't mean when you work for someone else, but how you get paid as an animator. So when you go work for a studio, they'll have a job. So I've worked with them in the past. I recommend working with them as a studio. I think they have a lot of creative talent. So let's just say Wild Brain. You look up Wild Brain, they're a Canadian company, but they've hired a lot of Americans because I'm an American. I've worked with them. So they'll list a job, a title, and they'll give you an idea of what sort of, sometimes they'll tell you what the salary is, but they'll give you an idea of the experience and the tools and the tool sets that are needed to do the job. And now Wild Brain is, largely, they have this huge catalog, and a part of that catalog, they've been kind of repurposing stuff. And so like there's Strawberry Shortcake, and there's, a bunch of other like cool talent that they've been putting together. And they recently did Yo Gabba Gabba, which is coming out in August, the Yo Gabba Land. So they have this content and they're kind of repurposing it. They're kind of looking at it like it is an asset and how to reinvigorate an older existing intellectual property, because that is your job as a visual communicator. Your job is to bring to life intellectual property. So if you want to do well as an animator, you have to think of it similar to a musician. A musician can get paid to do studio work, and that means to sit there in the studio and write music with somebody else. So, and I've done this because I was a session musician and I was also a signed artist. So you go in there, you sit in the studio and they, hey, we need you to write a bass line for this song. Sounds great. I listen to the song, I grab my bass, and I churn out a track. And they pay me a rate. And there you go. I get a check. And that's all. That's my job. Okay. And then afterwards, let's say you go on tour with a band or you play a band. They have a budget that they're going to pay the band for the venue, and that's what you do. You can be a touring artist. You can be, kind of a roadie. You can fill in, but altogether you get paid for performance or for your services. But the person who gets paid the most, as far as the musicians go, is the person who owns the song. They own the song. And because they own the song, they've written the song, they're going to get paid every time the song gets played. They get paid every time it's played in some fashion. Now, there are gatekeepers that keep them from getting paid, I would believe, a fair wage. Like Spotify is one of the worst when it comes to giving out royalties. Even if people listen to this and they think I'm bashing on Spotify, I'm only putting a spotlight on Spotify on their incredibly low royalty rate. It's very, very low. It's about 0.003%. And so it's basically a third of a penny for 10 plays or something nonsense like that. So you have to have your song play in the millions just to get paid a few $100. It's pretty tragic. I know because I've had songs get played really well, and I've had them just the royalties turn out to be just absolutely ridiculously abysmal. So, so that's a gatekeeper. So back in the day, the record labels would go and they would put their stuff on the radio, and the radio had to pay that stuff. Now, how did the radio pay for all that stuff? Advertising. That's why there's always advertising on radio stations. So you have to think about how your films are done. They're done through, okay, you have an actual job, you can go and work for a studio, but whoever owns the intellectual property is the one who's going to get paid the most. It's just like any business venture. When someone tells you like, hey, I want to cut this way, understand, don't think of it like a normal animation company. Don't think of it like even a band. You have to think of it like a tech startup. You have to think of it like equity that you're inducing and you're putting into a company. And this is if this changes, if this sort of mindset changes, animation will be done much differently, and it will revitalize and revigorate the way animation's done. And then the large, bloated, big studios won't be turning you down so much anymore because they'll just be hiring these smaller studios to do things because they have a lower overhead. So that's an important thing to say. Now, I want to get to the next step. How does animation paid for? So there is angel investing, the use your own money. Okay, that also helps a great deal. So ultimately, that's the thing about when it comes to financing animation. Animation there's the role that you can get paid for, and I think that's where most people begin. Like, oh, I love a cartoon, and I want to be a part of this. And what does it pay? Well, it pays really what they choose to charge. They choose to pay, and that's a bit of a silly way to answer it. But animation. Animation is not a set value. Like when people say that you're gonna make this much as a director, you're gonna make this much as a writer. These I guess these salaries are somewhat arbitrary because if you work for a studio that is union versus non-union, or if you're a veteran X, Y, and Z, they'll pay you significantly more. But if you are a part of a project that is highly, highly successful, what happens is you get paid a royalty. And so what you get paid, if you're not in the union, will be typically a salary, but it might just be based upon the project. So you might get paid a set rate, just like you were a session musician. Where you're playing the bass line for some pop song. That might be what you get paid. So that is actually why it's so difficult. Animation, especially the creative field, like the creative arts, is a gig industry. It's the gig economy. It might be a gig that lasts for 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years. It doesn't change the difference that you don't have a lot of stability in the work that you do. There's a lot of competition, a lot of people gunning for your job. And so it's really best for you to get yourself educated, get yourself focused on a project that you really, really love, and allow yourself to understand the business side of things. So the business side of animation is going to be the side that most people don't want to talk about. And that's because if you know what it is to make an animation, then all of a sudden you can realize that you're worth a lot more. So in my opinion, as an animator, the animators are the core, like the absolute core. Without an animator, you can't make animation. Okay? It sounds silly. Writers, beautiful, wonderful. You can't make good story without a good writer. Great. You can't bring a character to life without a voice actor. Absolutely. But you cannot make animation without an animator. Plain and simple. Okay. They are paramount to the whole process. But oftentimes animators are paid significantly less than writers and voice actors. And so, because a lot of times the writers and voice actors have been working in so-called the biz for a really long time, they're professional comedians, they have sort of underneath their belt that they charge a different rate than animators. They often can kind of negotiate and argue their salary. And that's why it's not necessarily a cut and dry system. I don't like this. I think a writer should take the same cut across the board no matter what project it is. And I don't think that a writer should take less money. I think the writer should take a flat fee, unless it is their individual property. The same goes for an animator. Same goes for for everything else. The thing is, your motivation is not money. Your motivation is to together create an incredible project. And that's the difference. If you're constantly quibbling over money instead of focusing on your role to support one another, and sometimes your role is going to be kind of cross pollinated. You're going to work on some writing, you're going to work on some storyboarding, you're going to work on back and forth. But if you are always focused on just the dollar, then you don't care that you wrote a turd of a film, but you got paid. And have you ever wondered when there's a gem of an actor or actress who shows up in a just horrible film? Like a film that you kind of laugh, you think, man, they had a rough draft of this at some point. But that is something you have to consider. Animation, Hollywood animation, is not done the way that it would be done at, say, if you worked at a factory or a coffee shop, or if you worked at other places. It's done a lot behind doors, and I'm telling you, let's kick those doors down. Let's talk about how it's done, and let's challenge that. So the other thing is with animation, it's the way that it's made. There's sponsorships. We mentioned this on the stream a couple times, and I will continue to develop this and talk about this and always try to answer questions how sponsors are made. So sponsorship is how things are done. Every bit of television you've watched in the last 70 years has been sponsored. Radio stations have sponsors. Sponsors pay for the arts, okay? It is the arts. And if you think, well, I don't like a big evil capitalist corporation that makes, flushable toilet paper, or that does these things, well, I'm sorry, but if you're an American and you enjoy the arts, then that means you have supported capitalism, because that is how we make animation here. And it's not evil. It is not evil. In other countries, what they do is they take a tax. They charge everyone taxes, and then they take that money and they line a budget for that. They take that money and they give that budget towards studios. So like the BBC, they get money from the government. They get tax written off money, right? They get money from the folks who live there, who pay taxes, and they use that for the arts. So it might seem less evil, right? But at the same time, everyone pays for that animation. And I really feel, and this is my attitude, is that animation is a consumption. It's a consumption by choice. It's not a consumption by force. So when you take a tax and you force everyone to pay for the arts, for all arts, then you're forcing other people to make without that choice. And this is fundamentally what makes me different as far as my view on taxes and capitalization of intellectual property. I'm not against taxes. Okay, so don't misconstrue what I'm saying. Is that I'm not against paying a fair share, but I do believe that when a government takes taxes, right, to cover all the arts, then that would either require the government to allow everyone to participate in that funds, right? So if I'm paying taxes for an animation, then if I have a studio, I should be able to apply for that money to get that money. Sometimes that works. Sometimes you can start a studio and the government has these grants and they give the arts. They give studios so they go and help them produce their animation. So sometimes that money goes straight to that. Other times it goes to an organization that's been very successful collecting money for a very long time. You're not going to compete with Sesame Street. Like, no one's going to be able to break into that market like they have, because Sesame Street has been doing it a really long time. And they are part of public broadcasting. So PBS, they get public money. These are not evil things. They're just the way that they do animation is not necessarily the norm. It's not how the Disney and Warner Brothers and these other big studios, DreamWorks, stuff like that, do these things. They get in bed with investors. They also have sponsors. So really, that's an important thing to understand. Animation has a big, big, big history of partnering with big brands. And if you cannot get your mind wrapped around that, take some time and watch some of your favorite cartoons and see what sort of commercials took place. It's hard now because most of the time we watch cartoons, they've been stripped of they've been stripped of those commercial ad breaks. But for example, if you watched a classic cartoon, there would be a commercial after it. There would be some sort of reel. It would be sponsored by one or the other. Animation is not devoid of the same thing, the same sort of business model of the news. Okay, the news does the same thing. The news, whether or not that be traditional media or social media, they all do the same thing. They require sponsors. So the more you can get yourself comfortable with the necessary relationship to build around sponsorships and those that carry the same values of you, the more you'll understand the business of animation. If you, for example, have an animation, and it's about kids that love to hang around like old dilapidated ghost house, like right. If they want to hang around these ghost house, you might think, well, how can I figure out what sort of funding? Who wants to pay for this? Sometimes there may be no direct relationship. Just a sponsor just wants to be attached to your project. This is dates me, but the classic film I totally think holds up is Wayne's World. It's a little spicy for the younger generation, but if you're a little bit older, I love that movie. I love it because eventually this Noah's Arcade company, they sponsor the Wayne's World with the funny antics of Wayne's World. And that's sort of that dynamic between sponsorship and art and the necessity of sponsorship. And so understand it. Don't hate the game. Just know that that's what it is. So you have to develop a strong skin and a strong mind when it comes to animation production. So when someone tells you, well, you don't have enough experience, that's fine. But if you have a sponsor to get behind your project, then you already have a bank. If you have your personal can fund your own project, then you don't need to deal with that. You do need to understand how royalties and distribution comes across. So I know I'm giving a great deal of information, but I'm also hopefully giving you information that is helpful to you. For example, if you were to put something on Amazon Prime, which is really exceptionally easy, and it's something that I've been meaning to get back to showing the next one of these episodes on the Whatever Happened to the Night Crew, because I process that as in 4K. It's really easy to put your stuff on Amazon Prime, like easy, like so easy that if you realize it's that easy, you might start doing it today. Especially if you're a YouTube creator, you can start putting that stuff up today. But the royalty on it is pretty low. It's really low. It's not lower than YouTube. Okay, YouTube has still a pretty low royalty rate. Now, YouTube has a different royalty rate, though. YouTube will give you sponsors. On Amazon Prime currently they give you about 6 cents an hour, which can be pretty rough. If you have 40 hours worth of content, let's do the math, right? 40 hours worth of content, 40, so 6 times 10, that's 60 cents. My goodness, that's $2.40 for someone to watch 40 hours of your content. That's pretty rough. But if you have 500,000 viewers, then that's really fantastic. So there are some ways to circumvent that, to realize that maybe Amazon might not be your only strategy. You may put it on YouTube and Amazon and maybe a few other places. And so some of those places, they change their mind about you when they see how popular you are. So Netflix is historically like, they have this closed deck. They don't tell you what your metrics are. When you work for Netflix, it's just all closed. They don't let you know. But Netflix, and they'll do something like a comedy special, right? You watch a comedy special on Netflix. They'll say, buy Netflix. Well, most time, 9 times out of 10, or if not 99 times out of 100, at least all the comedians that I've known, they produced the special, and then Netflix just optioned it after they were done. So they fronted the money, they produced what they had to do, and then Netflix said, sure, yeah, we'll put our name on that. And so Netflix pays them, and they don't really know how well they're doing. And so it's kind of unfortunate because they're not equal partners in that aspect. So know that not all these streaming platforms are equal. Netflix is not the king. Anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't done their homework. Netflix is popular. It's ubiquitous. It's like when we think of Disney and children and family entertainment, we do think that of them as reigning supreme. But the truth is, Illumination has far surpassed Disney in many ways. I mean, people and the Minions characters, as much as they may not be for everyone's sensibilities, those characters have churned a lot of money. And DreamWorks has done really well as well. So Disney is the perceived king, just like Netflix is the perceived king of streaming. There's all sorts of niche markets that have many, many different ways of gaining content. For example, if you are of the religious niche, that's a perfect example. If you look at the religious niche, EWTN, which is the Catholic broadcasting company, they have at least two, if not three times the subscribers and viewership of Netflix. I mean, easily. We're talking massively, massively more subscribers that are devoutly follow that channel. And for for very obvious reasons, because it is of significance to the people who watch it. There's no reason to be like, I would say, if you're going to watch Netflix, there's no religious devotion. There's no devotion to Netflix. There's just sort of an obsession or interest, but it becomes novel. Novel experiences are fun and they're great and they draw people in, but eventually they wear away. But people who do things that are core parts of their life, like their behavior, such as their religious behavior, that is a core part of people's consumption. And so that this is not necessarily like a propaganda episode, but just understand people's behaviors. If you're doing something that resonates with a religious audience, you know what? Like that's going to be great. That's going to be great for you to potentially pitch to those platforms. And if you are doing something towards those platforms, please reach out to me because I know some folks in that industry as well because I live outside of Nashville and it's a really great market. But nonetheless, like there's always opportunity for you to grow in a niche market that's boom. It may not be a cool market, okay? So divorce your mind from the idea of being cool because cool is subjective and cool people go broke all the time. Okay, cool people end up in the cold, and so that's a false idol. It's also just a waste of your time. Focus on something that resonates with you. So I hope that this has been helpful. It's been a large, long-winded conversation about how animation is done, but know that you are worth more, and that animation is done in such a way that it's overpriced, over bloated budgets because it's been done because the point of entry is so high. If you can lower that point of entry and create a production quicker, faster, and cheaper, you can compete with the big guys. And one of the things that the big guys have that you don't have is a ridiculous, ridiculous bottom line. Okay, they have to make a lot more money than you and I do. And this is actually just a last little thought on this. Years ago, there was a really great documentary. Again, when I recommend these things, if they are a little bit beyond the PG or G rating, I don't mean to lead anyone astray. It's more just an intellectual fruit or something of your curiosity. But there is a documentary called Indie Game, and it's about these small indie gamers, indie game developers that develop these games that they turn a really great profit because the indie game market has a very loyal, strong following, and these folks who turn out a little hit game. So an indie game developer can make $1 million and be able to retain most of that $1 million. Where these large studios, if they make $1 million, that might just cover payroll. And so it's not that these large AAA games, AAA artists, AAA studios are bad, but they're not going to be as competitive as the small fish in the pond. Because small can be fast and they can be agile. And that's where I really truly believe that the future of animation is no longer in the big studios. The future of animation is going to be the little studios that are doing big things that the big studios can't keep up with. And so, especially with the way that technology and education is readily available to everyone, the talent is there. And so, just the distribution needs to be fixed a little bit. But after that, Hollywood itself is going to be sweating because you can do more in your living room or your bedroom or your garage than they can do in a giant studio city. So I hope that you can challenge Hollywood, challenge the way things are being done, ask harder questions, and please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about how animation's done, at budgeting, put together financials, projections, all those like boring things that are important that at some point I will share more at links about. But I hope you all are doing well. I pray that you have a blessed day. Take care.